So my name is Jennifer Hiltwine, a member of CIT's CRCF team, and today's webinar will focus specifically on completing the budget and budget narrative. We are also offering a session specifically on the application and proposal, so if you haven't checked that out, I encourage you to view the recording of this morning's session, which will be available by the end of the week, or register to participate in a second session in January. Towards the end of this presentation, I'll give you the URL where you can access recordings and registration links for webinars. With that, let's go ahead and get started. During this webinar, we'll discuss matching funds and what can be considered matching funds. We'll also discuss filling out the budget template, both the budget and budget narrative tabs. I'll also cover a few program-specific notes to keep in mind during the process. Before we jump into everything, I want to make a quick announcement about the Letter of Intent deadline. Letters of Intent are a required part of the application process, and for our private sector applicants only, those who are submitting under the commercialization and/or the SBIR and STTR matching funds programs, the LOI deadline has been extended until this Friday, December 19th at noon. The extension is due to application difficulty experienced by applicants to these three programs when trying to complete the LOI. The deadline extension does not impact LOIs for the matching funds, imminent researcher recruitment, or facility enhancement loan programs, which were due yesterday, December the 16th by 5 p.m. We would appreciate your help in spreading the word to the private sector about the LOI deadline extension, especially if you know of entrepreneurs that didn't submit an LOI because they thought the deadline has passed. So thank you in advance for any additional outreach. First, we'll take a look at matching funds in the context of those monies that are supplied towards the project, not in the context of CRCF's matching funds program. Matching funds that we're discussing here are monies supplied by the CRCF applicant that meet or exceed the amount of funds requested for the project. The match must mirror both the total and annual amount of funds requested through CRCF. Matching funds are a required element for 3 of the 6 programs offered during this solicitation: commercialization, imminent researcher recruitment, and the matching funds programs. Matching funds are not required for the Facilities Enhancement Loan Program or the SBIR or STTR matching funds programs. For the latter two, the match component is fulfilled by the federal SBIR or STTR award. Matching funds cannot be identified or secured after the CRCF award is made. Matches must also be active and available during the proposed CRCF project's period of performance. For example, if an applicant secured matching funds during a 3-year grant and are wrapping up year 1 of this award, funds that have already been expended cannot be used as matching funds towards the CRCF project. Neither can funds that will be expended after the CRCF period of performance. Matches, at a minimum, must be 1-to-1. Examples of matching funds can be seen on the slide here and within our FAQs document. These include labor and/or fringe, consumables, purchased equipment, federal, private, or other grants or contracts for the same work as proposed in the CRCF application and aligned with the CRCF project's period of performance. Waived indirects are also acceptable sources of matching funds. You would not be asking for CRCF to cover your overhead and/or G&A costs, but these would count towards your 1-to-1 match. In general, whatever contribution is made must be specific to the CRCF project. Funds that are received from CIT's GAP funds or state contracts or grants are not eligible sources of matching funds. However, if you are a university applicant contributing salaries or indirects, which may be state monies, these are acceptable sources of matching funds. The budget and budget narrative templates are within a single Excel document, but appear on 2 separate tabs. Both the budget and budget narrative must be completed and uploaded, still as a single Excel document, into your application. Templates for the budget and budget narrative are program-specific and available for download from the URL on your screen and then by selecting the specific program. Matching funds should be recorded and explained, as applicable, and in as much detail as possible on both the budget and the budget narrative. On the budget template, you'll see a combination of white and yellow cells. Enter the data for your CRCF budget into the white cells. Yellow cells are formula-driven and locked. These cells will auto-populate based on the numbers that you enter into the white cells. If your CRCF project will last longer than 1 year, contact my CRCF team at crcf@cit.org to request a multi-year template. Additionally, on both the Budget and Budget Narrative tabs, be sure to enter the CIT reference number and project title. The CIT reference number is a unique number that CIT assigns to your project once your letter of intent is converted into a program application. This number can be found pre-populated within your online questionnaire. A sample of the budget sheet, this one for the Matching Funds program, is visible on your screen. The bottom of each budget has cells to calculate the percentage of requested CRCF funds for direct and indirect costs. For CRCF funds intended for indirect costs, such as overhead and G&A, enter the requested rates in the provided blank cells in cells A19 and/or A20. Each match, for those programs that require one, must equal or exceed the total amount of CRCF requested funds. To complete the budget, note the budget categories by line and columns for both the request and for the match. The purpose of the budget narrative is to understand how the applicant expects to spend CRCF funds. It also identifies the source or sources, amount, and uses of matching funds. For CRCF interested in indirect costs, please cite the requested rate or rates, your organization's approved rate or rates, and who approves the rate, for example, a federal agency. Like with the budget template, when filling out the budget narrative, enter data only in white cells. All of the white cells have wrap text enabled, so when submitting, please be sure to make sure this is still intact and that all of your content is visible. This will help CRCF reviewers capture all of your information during the review process. Please note that correctly completing the budget, and especially the budget narrative, are expectations of submitted applications. Review the program guidelines for the required level of detail in the budget narrative. Guides are also included within the template itself to aid you. Applications that do not comply with program guidelines will not move past the initial review. Again, an example of the budget narrative template for the Matching Funds program can be seen here. As with the budget, templates are nearly the same for all programs, with the exception of the instructions, including the requirement to explain provided matching funds, since not all programs require these. At a high level, the budget narrative should explain the columns and amounts from your budget and detail what the requested CRCF funds cover. In all cases, we ask you to provide as much detail as possible about the expenditures for the proposed CRCF project. I'd like to take just a couple of minutes to provide some examples of what we're looking for on the budget narrative. For example, if funds on the budget were allocated towards labor, your narrative should explain who, what, and how much. Another example, say that 2 researchers are supported by the same CRCF project. Indicate the salary for each person, the time they will spend working on the project, and in total, the amount requested for their labor. Another example is if travel is anticipated for the CRCF project and you've indicated this on the budget. In the budget narrative, detail what travel might be expected, to where, how many times, and the duration of each trip. Also include the trip's purpose. If funds are expected for fringe, indicate the fringe rate and how you came up with this rate, including what it covers. Under the consultants and subcontractors category, you might put funds towards an attorney or patent filings, or a subcontractor who will process samples. In this category, explain the funds that are requested and what they will cover. Also indicate the location of the subcontractor or consultant. If any work will be done outside of Virginia, this must be explained and justified. Also indicate why this individual was chosen. As a final example, if CRCF monies will be directed towards equipment, describe what is being purchased and its use for the CRCF project. If you are submitting under a program for which additional matching funds are not required, such as the SBIR or STTR matching funds programs, you do not need to complete the matching funds section of the budget or budget narrative. However, if you have decided to put matching funds towards the project, additional matching funds that is, please do complete these sections on both tabs with the required level of detail. Complete information on the FY015 solicitation can be found on the URL on your screen. Resources are available to aid applicants in the CRCF process. In addition to program guidelines, we've prepared an FAQs document that addresses many common questions from the community, including examples of matching funds and how to complete the budget and budget narrative. Additional live webinars are scheduled, including another session of this presentation and one on the application process focusing on the proposals. Webinars are recorded and posted to CIT's website at this URL. If you can't make a live session, you can still view content on your own time. If anyone is interested in having a PDF copy of the slides only, no narrative, please email my team with the request at crcf@cit.org. This email address is also the one to use if you have any questions about CRCF. Myself or a member of my team will be glad to get back to you. Now I'll open up the session to any questions that you may have at this time. All participants will remain on mute, so please submit any inquiries via the questions function on the webinar panel, and I'll take those in the order that they're received. So the first question, are successful previously submitted project budgets and budget narratives available for review? We do not make any of the previously submitted materials available. However, if you have specific questions on completing those, we'd be glad to address those at CRCF. This year we have tried to indicate more specifically within the templates themselves the required level of detail, and in all cases the more detail the better in terms of explaining what the funds are going to be used towards, both for the CRCF request and for the matching funds. So referencing the matching funds program, is there a cap on the indirect cost rate? It's a fantastic question, and yes. Actually, for all of the programs, there are caps on the indirect cost rates. For matching funds, that cap is 30%. For the eminent researcher recruitment and facilities enhancement loan, that cap is 12%. Actually, as an additional point to that last question about caps on indirects, for the commercialization program, that cap is 10%. The cap information is located in each set of program guidelines, and I have the commercialization one here as an example. It is right in the section that discusses conditions specific to the program. For commercialization, this is pages 4 to 5. And it would be in a similar section for each of the other set of program guidelines. I can also take a moment to let you know that in the evaluation criteria, as also called out in the program guidelines, those proposals, or rather applications that request direct costs only, are reviewed more favorably. We like to see what those funds are going towards, and if it's for direct costs only, you may have recalled from the budget narrative that we do look at the ratio between direct costs and indirect costs. Those that are requesting the direct costs only are reviewed more favorably. Indirect costs can also be used for a match. That is correct. Again, if you are providing the indirect costs as a match, you would still need to cite on the budget narrative what those rates were, how they'll be reached, who approved the rates, and that kind of information that were discussed on the previous slides. All right, so we have a question on the location of a definition differentiating between indirect and direct costs. Direct costs are those costs that are going specifically towards the project, such as labor, consultants or subcontracts, materials and supplies. Those indirect costs would be things such as overhead and G&A, and that may be called out specifically in the budget section of each of the program guidelines, but it's a great question all the same. So those would be the differences there. And if that doesn't answer your question, you can either ask again or feel free to email us if you need further explanation. All right, folks, we'll go ahead and pull this webinar to a close. As I've mentioned a few times now, if you do have any questions after this wraps up, please do email us at crcf@cit.org. I can't stress that email address enough, and we'd be glad to assist you with any questions that you may have.